Have you ever stopped to think that something really unusual could be happening to the world? Recently, God revealed to me a prophecy that left me speechless. It's unlike anything I've ever heard. It's not something you'll hear every day, and it's certainly not one of those predictions we see out there. This message was profound, direct, and made me question everything we know about the future. But what does this prophecy really mean? Are we about to see the fulfillment of something greater than we imagine? I, Benjamin Netanyahu, never imagined that I would be able to experience something so extraordinary in my life. One day, as I pondered the future of our nation, I was struck by a vision I could not ignore. At first it seemed simple, like any common thought that passes through a man's mind in his daily life. But it soon revealed a picture so profound that it made me question everything I already knew. I saw a manger, and it wasn't just any manger. It was like the one in which Jesus was born, with the hay spread inside. But what impacted me most was not the hay, nor even the simple shape of the manger. What really perplexed me was the wood surrounding it. It was not an ordinary wood, as one might imagine. It was carved wood, with intricate patterns that intersected in ways you didn't see anywhere else. It seemed as if those shapes had been drawn by divine hands, each curve and each line, tracing images that seemed to represent trees, as if nature itself was contained in that manger, representing the life that is renewed, the life that came into the world through Christ. I could feel that this vision was not just a reminder of the birth of Jesus, but something deeper, more universal. And then something changed. The vision transformed, and I saw a staff, Aaron's staff. Instantly, I was transported to a distant time in the Old Testament where Moses and Aaron were leading the people of Israel out of Egypt under God's divine direction. Moses, the great leader, had difficulty expressing himself, and it was Aaron who spoke on his behalf. As God's spokesman, I'm reminded of the words of Exodus 4:15, which say, "You shall speak with him and through your mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his, and I will teach you what you should do." This staff, which represented the authority given to Aaron, was also a symbol of a mission given by God to guide and free the people. At first these images seemed disconnected, but gradually I realized that they were deeply intertwined. The wood of the manger with its patterns and shapes symbolized the life that Jesus brings to the world, and Aaron's staff represented the mission that God's people received, the leadership and guidance that we are given to guide others. Everything was interconnected for a reason that could not be ignored. The role of leading, guiding, being the voice of God on earth. As I reflected on this vision, I began to understand an even deeper truth. As Aaron, the leader of the people, spoke for Moses, we too are called to speak and act on behalf of something much greater. We are guided by Christ, who came into the world to teach us, to show us the way, and just as the people of Israel were freed from slavery in Egypt, we are also freed from the ties that bind us in life. Christ the Messiah, the wood of the manger, and Aaron's staff are symbols of a divine call for us to rise up and lead with wisdom and compassion. Are we like Moses and Aaron, ready to assume our role in a plan greater than we can understand? Are we prepared to follow Christ's leadership and, through our actions, fulfill the mission given to us? I believe that more than ever, we are being called to understand the depth of these words and to see the signs that God gives us in moments like this. Who are we to ignore the divine call? What does this mean for the future of our nation, our faith, our humanity? Today I want to invite you to click the like button on this video. This simple gesture helps you to recommend this content to more people, allowing them the opportunity to learn more about God's Word and be blessed with these transformative truths. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do so now. It's completely free. And by subscribing, you'll stay up to date with all the new content. Also remember to activate the notification bell to ensure you don't miss any of the next videos that we have prepared with so much care. I was there in my office with my mind attentive to the nation's daily challenges, when suddenly, something I never imagined would happen took over me. The vision that had begun with the manager and Aaron's staff now intensified. A Benjamin Netanyahu felt something indescribable, as if a divine presence was surrounding me. What I saw next I don't have enough words to describe, but I will try. Aaron's staff, which until then was only a symbol of divine authority and mission, began to transform before my eyes. Branches began to sprout from it, little shoots of life that reached into the heavens, as if nature itself was being restored. It was as if the staff was now a living tree, with deep roots that penetrated the earth, and branches that reached the heights of the sky. The sight left me silent, and I knew I was being shown something great, something beyond what the eyes can see, something beyond a simple stick. It was the representation of a destiny that goes beyond a person's life, something that begins with birth and extends through generations, something that only God could do. And it was at that moment that the voice of the Lord spoke clearly in my heart. I am doing something in my church now that begins at birth and goes beyond a person's years. That sentence resonated deeply with me. It was as if I had been transported to a divine plane that surpassed the limits of time. God the Creator, the Eternal, has a plan for the lives of each of us, a plan that begins before we are born, and that does not end with our departure. He knows what we need before we ask, and He already has the destiny mapped out for each of us. Even when we don't fully understand it, the Lord made me understand that this growth, which came from Aaron's staff, was something that only He could generate. It was not something man could create or manipulate. It was something that flowed from the very heart of God. And I realized that, as the leader of a nation, I was part of something much bigger. I was not just leading a nation, but being a conduit for something divine, something that goes beyond the limits of Jerusalem, of Israel, and beyond the borders of our human understanding. And then clearly and distinctly, I heard the voice of the Lord again, this time leading me to the Scriptures. He said 1 Samuel 2. Immediately, I knew He was leading me to a specific verse, one that had transformative power. Hannah's prayer, he said. And at that moment something profound awakened in me. The story of Hannah, a woman who, despite not being able to conceive, cried out to the Lord with a contrite heart, touched me in an unexpected way. Hannah's story, as recorded in 1 Samuel, is not just about a woman asking for a son. It is about the total surrender of God's will. Hannah was sterile and 4 years. She suffered from the pain of not having children. But she never lost hope in her heart. She knew God had a plan. Even as the world around her looked down on her, she prayed fervently, and the priest Eli saw her praying so intensely that he thought she was drunk. But Hannah wasn't drunk. She was just overflowing with faith, crying out to the Lord for a miracle. And then God heard his prayer. Hannah conceived Samuel, the great prophet of Israel. But it was not Hannah's plan. It was the divine plan. God knew she couldn't have children, and He knew which child He would bring to her. At the right time, God knew that He needed someone dedicated to Him, and He knew that Hannah's answer would be a yes, a complete surrender of her son to serve the Lord. Hannah's story was not just about a woman, but about a God who prepares the way and is in control of all things, even when we can't see the whole picture. In 1 Samuel 1:27, Hannah says, "For this child I prayed, and the Lord granted me my petition, which I asked of Him." This touched me deeply. Hannah's prayer was a prayer of faith, and the fulfillment of the promise was a testimony to God's faithfulness. He already knew what Hannah needed before she even asked, and His response was not only a blessing for Hannah, but for the entire people of Israel. Samuel would not just be a son to Hannah, but the leader that God would use to lead the nation of Israel. As I reflected on this, I realized something profound. God acts on our behalf in ways that surpass our understanding. He has a plan that goes beyond our limited vision, and He is always present, guiding us in moments of doubt, in moments of waiting, as happened with Hannah. I, as a leader, needed to understand that my role was not just to make political decisions, but also to walk in accordance with the divine will, like Aaron did, like Anna did. God was reminding me that my leadership does not come from my own strength, but from His guidance and providence. That vision of Aaron's rod, that now transformed into a tree, with branches that sprouted towards the heavens, represented something that transcends what we can see. She spoke of growth that comes from God, of a divine plan that has no end, and God in His providence guides us even when we don't understand why we are being led down certain paths. Like Hannah, we need to trust that even as we wait, God is at work. He has something bigger in mind, something that goes beyond our limitations and understandings. What does this mean for us today, for our nation, and for the future we are building? How can we, like Anna, trust God knowing that He already has a divine plan? For each of us, I believe, we are being called to live in accordance with this truth, and it is our role as leaders and as a nation to recognize that God's plan is perfect, even when we cannot see the totality. It was a calm night in Jerusalem, but within my mind a spiritual storm was brewing. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, was being led by a vision that transcended everything I knew about politics and leadership. With every passing moment, I felt more distant from the physical world around me, as though I was being guided by a greater force, a force that had something to say to me, something I could not ignore. That night, the vision that began with Aaron's rod and the mangle no longer made sense only as symbols of the past, but as living messages being revealed to me. I now saw Aaron's rod sprouting with branches, not from an ordinary tree, but from a tree with a divine purpose. It was as if the Lord was showing me something even deeper. It was as if He was saying, I am raising leaders who are chosen from birth, those who, although they may not yet fully know the path, have a destiny mapped out by me. I then remembered the story of Hannah. She is often overlooked in the grand narrative of the Old Testament, yet her role plays a far more significant part than many realize, even leading to the birth of Jesus. But in that moment, it wasn't just about Hannah's story. It was about the deeper lesson embedded in her journey, the lesson of being chosen by God for something much larger than herself. Hannah had been barren, unable to bear children, but her heart was desperate. She cried out to the Lord, not in bitterness but in deep humility, believing that if God would answer her, He could do something greater than she could imagine. In verse Samuel 1:10-11, it says, in bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord, and she made a vow saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery, and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life. That prayer, that cry for deliverance, was heard by God. He did not only give her a son, He gave her a prophet, a servant, one who would lead Israel in a pivotal time. Samuel wasn't just any child. He was a man chosen by God before he even existed, marked for greatness in the eyes of the Creator. And it wasn't Hannah's plan. It was God's. That's when the Lord spoke clearly to me. I am calling leaders who are filled with the Spirit from birth. I know who my chosen ones are, and I can call them to positions long before they are aware of their calling. The Lord revealed to me that He knows the path of every person, long before they are born. Even when we walk in darkness, He is already watching over us, protecting us, preparing us for what is to come. It's like the story of Samuel as a young boy. Samuel did not yet know the Lord, but God knew him, and when the time was right, He called out to him. Samuel, still just a child, responded with obedience, saying, Speak, for your servant is listening. 1 Samuel 3:10. He didn't know what lay ahead, but his heart was ready to serve. This was the kind of leader God was raising, not someone who was perfect or fully understanding of His ways, but someone with a humble heart, someone willing to serve, even when the road ahead was uncertain. I realized then that this was the kind of leader God is looking for in our world today, those who are humble, those who are ready to serve in any capacity, and those whose hearts are open to God's calling, even before they understand the full scope of His plan. The Lord then reminded me of 1 Samuel 2:3. Do not keep talking so proudly, or let your mouth speak such arrogance, for the Lord is a God who knows, and by him deeds await. This verse struck me deeply. Hannah's prayer was not just a cry for help, it was a prophecy, a declaration, that God is the one who lifts up and brings down leaders. He is the one who knows our hearts, and he knows the leaders he has chosen. Even before they know themselves, God is calling leaders today who are filled with the Spirit. Leaders who may not have a full understanding of their calling, but whose hearts are ready to follow him. These are not the leaders who seek power or glory for themselves, but those who are humble enough to say, Lord, here I am, use me. And he has been preparing them for this moment, for this time in history, just as he prepared Samuel, just as he prepared Hannah for the birth of a prophet. And I, as the leader of this nation, found myself confronted with this realization. The path I walk is not my own. I am part of a larger story, a story written long before my time, and I must trust that the Lord's plan for Israel, for Jerusalem, and for the world is unfolding, just as he has ordained the people of Israel. The leaders of Israel are not in control of this journey. We are simply instruments in his hands. The Lord spoke to me that night, reminding me of his sovereignty over everything, and in that moment I knew I had to lead, with humility and submission to his will. This is a time for leadership that is willing to serve, that is willing to trust in God's timing, and that is ready to walk the path he has set before us, even when we cannot see the end of the road. The story of Samuel, of Hannah, and of God's divine calling reminded me of a deeper truth. God is raising up leaders who will serve his will, regardless of their understanding or position. These are leaders whose hearts are open to God, who are ready to follow his call, and who will carry out his purposes, even when they cannot see what lies ahead. And I am just one part of that story, one part of a larger, divine plan that only God can see in its entirety. The words of the Lord echoed in my mind as I, Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, reflected on the vision I had just experienced, the image of the manger, Aaron's rod, and the revelation about the leaders called by God, continued to haunt me. I knew something profound was being unveiled before me, something with implications not just for my country, but for the entire world. The Lord said to me, listen, you and many others can be called to serve, but for that a humble heart is necessary. In 1 Samuel 3:19 it is written, And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. This passage never made as much sense to me as it did. Now Samuel was a young man devoted to the Lord, not fully understanding what was happening around him, but still firm in his faith. The Lord guided him, he is now guiding us. I felt the weight of this truth as I considered the generation of leaders God was raising up. These were not leaders who sought fame or glory, but those who were humbly ready to serve, those who, like Samuel, would listen intently to the voice of God and fulfill his will without question. The vision wasn't just about the past, but about the future. The future leaders of Israel and the world would be like rocks, steadfast, unshaken, unwavering in their faith. No matter what they faced, they would be firm, for their eyes would be set on eternity. And in that moment, I understood that the vision was a message for us now. The Lord was telling me that we would soon witness the rise of young people, dedicated entirely to the service of God. These young people, some of whom were still children, would be instruments of God's power, and miracles would flow through them. Signs and wonders would happen through children, and even around infants. These people would carry the mark of the Spirit of God, a sign and wonder to a generation that had turned its back on the Creator, seeking love in the wrong places, seeking satisfaction in all the wrong things. These young leaders would be a beacon for the lost, guiding them back to the arms of the Creator. The Lord spoke again, urging me to continue. Even though I didn't fully understand everything, this would be a challenge. But I knew that I had to trust him. He had spoken about the one 44,000 in the book of Revelation, and I knew this message had to be shared. In Revelation 1:4, it says, "These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits to God and to the Lamb. These are the ones who will be marked in the final generation on earth, the 144,000. They will be marked by their dedication to the Lord, even if it means giving up what others hold dear. They will be like John the Baptist, preparing the way for the Lord's return, but also testifying to the work Jesus has already done. These leaders will be consecrated to the Lord, much like the Levites in the Old Testament, who were set apart for God's service, living lives of holiness and righteousness. As I stood there, my mind racing with these thoughts, I realized the weight of this calling was not just for a select few, but for all who are willing to humble themselves and serve. God has chosen people from before their birth to fulfill His will. These are the leaders who will rise in the coming years. Leaders who, like Samuel, will listen intently to God's voice and respond with unwavering obedience, no matter the cost. These are the people who will change the world, not with political power or earthly authority, but with a heart fully surrendered to the will of God. And I, as a leader of Israel, must be prepared to embrace that same humility and obedience, trusting that the Lord is working His plan. Even when I cannot see the full picture, the Lord is raising up leaders today, and it is our responsibility to recognize that calling and to humble ourselves before Him, ready to serve in any capacity He calls us to. This is the message I heard that night, and it is a message that will shape not just Israel's future, but the future of the entire world. God is calling His people, and those who answer will be marked by His Spirit, prepared to serve and lead in the times to come. As I, Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, stood in deep reflection, the weight of the vision that had been revealed to me continued to press upon my heart and mind. I had witnessed in my spirit a profound shift, a divine calling not just for Israel, but for the entire world. The Lord was not only speaking to the leaders of today, but also to the generations to come. It was as if I had been allowed to peer into the future, where God was preparing leaders, just as He had raised up Samuel in the days of old. I remembered the story of Eli, the priest, who had failed to guide his sons in righteousness. Eli had allowed his sons to act wickedly, and in turn God had removed him from his position, declaring that He would no longer allow the priesthood to be desecrated. Eli's sons made themselves vile, and He restrained them not first. Samuel 3:13. It was a painful reality, but God's judgment was just. He said enough is enough. And Eli died that very day. This was a sobering reminder that no one, not even those in positions of great authority, are exempt from God's righteous judgment when they fail to follow His commands. The Lord spoke to me clearly. There are many elites in this generation, but I am raising up Samuels to take their place. The message resonated deep within me. I understood the weight of that statement. The Samuels were the faithful ones, the ones who would be raised up to serve the Lord, even when the world around them seemed to falter. These were the leaders who would not compromise their integrity or their calling no matter the cost. In fact, I could see how this was happening already. The world was in desperate need of such leaders, people who would stand firm in the face of adversity and boldly declare the truth of God's word. And then the Lord spoke again, reminding me of the 144,000 mentioned in the book of Revelation. These, He said, would be preserved during the time of tribulation, proclaim the gospel to all nations. As I reflected on the vision I had, I could not help but see how the words of the Bible were unfolding. In our time, the 144,000 would not only be witnesses to the world, but also a symbol of the perseverance and faithfulness that God was calling His people to embody. In these final days in 1 Samuel, we read that Samuel grew before the Lord, and the Lord was with him. Yet Eli, did not perceive the greatness of what God was doing. His sons, though they were in a position of leadership, were not prepared to be priests before the Lord. They lacked the humility and the reverence that God required of his servants. This struck me profoundly. God had called Samuel even before his birth, even before his mother Hannah had conceived. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition, which I asked of him first. Samuel 1:27. God knew what he was doing. He was preparing a leader for Israel, long before Samuel was born. And then I thought of King David. When David went to Ahimelech, the priest in 1 Samuel 21, he asked for consecrated bread, which was only to be eaten by the priests. This bread represented the holiness and dedication required to serve before the Lord. But David, in his desperate state, was given the bread to sustain him, not because he was perfect, but because he was willing to recognize the Lord's provision and rely on him. This story resonated with me as a leader today. It reminded me that none of us are perfect. We are all in one way or another, like David, imperfect, broken, yet willing to rely on God and trust in his provision. As the Lord spoke to me, he reminded me of a powerful truth from the New Testament. But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood and holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. 1 Peter 2:9. This is the calling that God has placed on all of his people, not just leaders but every believer. We are called to be a royal priesthood, consecrated to serve the Lord, set apart for his purposes. The Lord made it clear to me that this wasn't about perfection. It was about dedication. It was about being willing to lay down our pride and to humble ourselves before him. It was about recognizing that though we are imperfect, God can still use us just as he used Samuel, David, and so many others throughout history. The Lord doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And then the Lord's voice became clearer than ever. If I am calling you, I will provide everything you need to carry out the task I have set before you. It was a comforting thought, a reassurance that no matter what we face, no matter how daunting the challenges may seem, God would equip us with everything we need to fulfill his will. I reflected on this as I looked at my own life. As the leader of this great nation, it was about, and I realized a greater purpose, the path ahead that God had set for us, just as he had set for the world and for power. I understood that as a leader, I was called to humbly serve the people of Israel, to seek the will of the Lord, and to guide my nation in the path of righteousness. In those moments I saw the vision of the future more clearly than ever before. I saw a generation rising up, led by faithful servants of God, who would proclaim the truth of the gospel. In the face of adversity, who would stand firm, unwavering and unshaken. They would be like rocks, grounded in the eternal truth of God's word. I knew then that I had a choice. Each one of us, no matter our position, has a choice to make. Will we choose humility? Will we choose to serve God faithfully, even when it is difficult? Will we, like Samuel, be willing to listen to God's voice and follow his call, no matter where it leads? This is the challenge that lies before us, and it is a challenge that I, as a leader, must take seriously. It is a challenge that every believer must take seriously. God is raising up leaders. Samuel's not Elias. He is preparing his people for the great days ahead, and those who are willing to humble themselves, to consecrate themselves to the Lord, will be the ones who will stand firm. In the days to come, as I reflected on these things, I knew that Israel had a crucial role to play in this grand narrative, and as the Prime Minister, it was my duty to ensure that our nation remained steadfast in our faith, walking in obedience to the Lord, trusting in his guidance and preparing the way for the fulfillment of his divine plan.